So, to find out what is X, we are going to look into the factors of what development consists of and what factors go into development. I believe that the majority of ways we use to measure development currently are inaccurate and not inclusive of crucial factors. We use numbers such as GDP, gross domestic product, the Gini coefficient, and gross national happiness. GDP only discusses economic factors and it does not show inequality in distribution. The Gini coefficient is measuring inequality with a score between 0 and 1. When a country has a score of 0, it means everyone in the country has the exact same amount of money. When a country has a score of 1, one person in the country has all the money. 0 is the ideal number. The Gini coefficient adds to GDP because inequality can be judged, but it still only includes economic factors. The gross national happiness scale attempts to measure factors other than economic success, but there are so many factors that aren't included. Also, how can you measure happiness on a national level? Therefore, we are going to include as many factors as we can and find our own equation for development. It is going to get a little complicated, but we're going to try to pay attention to the complexities because that is what's missing from the other equations. So we're going to base our equation on these three postulates, mathematical assumptions. The first postulate is that development entails giving people their basic human needs. The second postulate is to give people their basic human needs, we must use resources. And the third one is the people who are being developed are essential to our equation. So X equals basic human needs plus resources plus people. So starting with postulate number 1, with basic human needs, what do you guys think are basic human needs? Anybody? Anybody?
Food.
Basic human needs.
Food.
Food. Water. Shelter.
Housing.
Alright, and the list can go on. So pretty much what I
We
did...
had money?
Money.
No, I'm joking.
Okay, well, I think it can be a basic human need.
Sorry.
Exactly. Thank you. So I split these basic human needs into 9 main categories, which include subsistence, understanding, identity, affection, participation, freedom, protection, creativity, and leisure. And these basic human needs fit into each of these categories. So to fully understand what these categories represent so we can fit them into the equation, we need to understand what each of these main categories are. So to go through subcategories of each of these, like a subcategory of subsistence would be food, and another one would be something like water. So can anybody think of any other subcategories for subsistence? Like what else would go in the basic human need of subsistence?
Shelter?
Does medicine go in that one?
Yes. Public health. And for understanding, any subcategories?
What, a basic education?
Yeah, so basic education.
Freedom to think.
Perfect. And then identity. I think this one's a little tricky, but I was thinking like personal identity that people can have, cultural identity, religious identity. And for affection, can anyone think of any subcategories? I think relationships.
Family phone.
Participation, what can people participate in?
Work.
Political process.
Like religion and churches and stuff.
Culture.
decent community. Protection, what do you guys think goes in protection? Or freedom, I'm sorry. Freedom. Any
You
subcategories?
get into laws.
Yeah.
Choices?
This also goes like into our First Amendment. So like freedom of speech.
Freedom to travel. Also
Protection. So financial security I think goes under protection.
This is government.
And maybe like peace, not having.
Right, which can go into like safe neighborhoods, safe country. Creativity. This one's kind of tricky because it's a little abstract, but anyone have any subcategories for creativity? Just like being able to participate in the arts. Also like having individuality, which kind of goes with identity, but I think that's one way people are creative, finding out who they are and expressing it.
I don't know if this is too vague, but empowerment to think differently.
Freedom of choice. Yeah, I think you've already captured that.
Right. And leisure. Any subcategories that go into leisure? I think that one's pretty broad, but like family time, being able to spend with your time with your family.
Which, I mean, not having to work all the time.
Right, exactly.
Sports.
Sports, that's good.
Enrichment's a great word.
But are we saying that all these things that we're writing down are basic human needs? Like, we ask if we like really need free time.
Well, I don't think we necessarily need free time, but I think that when we're trying to develop people and we're looking at these 9 basic things, I think, well, we've discussed this obviously, but I think leisure might be one of the things that's most like,
disposable or something.
right, like
low priority.
right, nobody knows, like, do we really need leisure? But I think there's a lot of things, just being able to like have time to like eat dinner with your family, which would go under leisure and stuff. I don't know if we necessarily need to like be able to participate in extra activities, have time to like take naps and stuff, but just like basic things like family time I think is definitely a basic human need.
You do need to be able to sleep and rest. I mean,
Right.
I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
people get, I mean, slaves were run down because they never got a chance to sleep and rest. And so, I mean, maybe that's a subcategory. It is a basic thing.
Yeah, so just,
Well, I think of that woman yesterday, one of the people talked about, she gets up at 4:30 in the morning, she takes care of her kids, all this, and she falls in bed at 9 o'clock at night, and gets up at 4:30 in the morning. That's every day.
alright, so if we look over to our equation now, the basic human needs part, we now have our basic human needs added, and then each of their subcategories. So we'll have like S1 plus S2 plus S3, so on and so forth for each of the categories. So it ends up being an unbelievable amount of numbers and letters, which can obviously be extended because we can argue like many more things that people need to subside and understand in identity. So now to fully understand development, I think it's important to understand like what problems go into these things. So I picked out a couple of these things, 3 of them, going food, public health, and basic education, that we can like fully discuss the problems in each of these subcategories. So for like food, a major problem we have is like not enough food, so lack of food. Also not healthy food, so malnutrition. people are living in like a farming society and there's a time of drought, so they're not getting like the enough food they need from agricultural bases. It also relates to the environment. So, well, first of all, if we're talking about sustainability with food, if we're shipping our food all around the country, we're also bringing down the sustainability because we're using lots of oil. So sustainability goes into that. And there's many other problems that just go into the category of food. And then public health. What are some problems with public health, things that we need to work on?
Access to medicine.
Medicine.
Basic vaccinations.
Overall distribution channel, how it's distributed, and where it's distributed.
Also things like roads, transportation. How are the sick people going to get to where they need to go? Things like hospital beds.
Well, or what we learned in one of them yesterday about the fact that you can get paid if you're sick, but not if you're healthy.
Right, so financial concerns.
Thank you.
And we go into the next category of education. What do you think goes involved in education? Problems that we have with basic education.
Gender biases.
Gender roles. Things like curriculum, what's going to be taught in the school, who gets to decide what's going to be taught.
Even access to, even having access to it.
Students being able to attend. Location.
Quality. Priority.
Priority, a desire for education, to want to go to school. So when we look at these problems, it's obvious that the problems could go on. There could be a lot more of them, but I think one of the important things to look at is that these problems can be related. When students are at school all day long, they need food. They need healthy food, food to keep them going through the day. And so if they have food, school will become more of a priority and access will increase because more kids will want to go to school. And then if we also look at something like gender roles, when we have gender bias in schools, a solution can be like if the parents send their girls to school, then they can get twice as much food. And if they get twice as much food, their parents can also have a meal too. So by working with these issues together, we can solve things, little parts of each problem together. And when we're solving things like this, and girls have the opportunity to go to school, then things like their identity and their affection can go up and increase. They can start to figure out who they are and start appreciating themselves and realizing that they have potential for the future. So when we go back to the equation, to represent relationships, we have like the relationship we just discussed of like subsistence with F1, the food one, understanding with priority, and also with gender roles. And this will increase affection and identity. And the relationships we can make between these things can go on for a very long time. Food, public health, obviously very related if they need food to get their medicine. And then if we talk about other things like participation, political process, relates to the protection of the government. So pretty much, so far, our equation is just a bunch of basic human needs that we have, their relationships together, and hopefully how we can solve them. So the next part that we need is how can we solve these equations? So we can solve them by using resources. I think that when people think of resources, the first thing that comes to their mind is aid. So when we're discussing aid, I made this little aid factor tree. That represents a person from the United States with money to give. I think when we're trying to understand aid, we need to understand exactly where the money's going and like how complicated the money flow really is. So a person in the United States who has money, they're going to have a job, and they're going to pay their taxes. Their taxes are going to go to the U.S. government. The U.S. government giving aid to other countries is called bilateral aid, country to country. So Sweden giving money to Kenya. 1% of our total budget in the United States goes to our foreign aid. And of this 1% of all of our budget, these percents are from 2010. 29% goes to the military, and 71% goes to economics, economic success. So of this economic success, we give 8% to multilateral organizations. So those will be things like the United Nations, the World Bank, the WHO. 32% goes to the State Department, which includes things like global health, drug control, anti-terrorism. 15% go to other things. Most of those are like the Peace Corps, other grants that we provide for students. And 6% go to the Department of Agriculture, which is food. 39% of this money, the bulk of it, goes to USAID. USAID is our main aid organization where we have programs in many different countries. And depending on the problems in each country, we decide what we're going to give them money for and how that's going to be allocated. So in a country like Ecuador, where one of the problems is environmental concerns, we're going to work with our environmental program in USAID. Now we can also give money to a favorite non-governmental organization, an NGO. This money, we have to take and consider, is going to go to their overhead, things like paying for their employees, paying for their advertisements, the videos they're making, all that extra stuff. And then generally there's an NGO organization in the country, or they send people from their NGO to the country to put this money into action. It really just depends on what the NGO is. And then the multilateral funding is international organizations, such as the UN. Generally, a single person can't just donate to the UN or the World Bank. But in the United States, we have the UN Foundation, which was set up so a person can donate to the UN. And so the UN Foundation money is going to go to their overhead, then to the United Nations, and then the United Nations is going to allocate the money to their UN projects, such as the World Food Program, which is a huge project, or affiliated organizations, such as the Red Cross. And so this is pretty much shows where our money goes and how it's being distributed for like one of our resources. But we need to take into consideration that like this is a lot of money going in, but is all this money going to positive things? And so is all of this adding to the equation, or is there anything being subtracted? And so right here are things that I think are being subtracted when we give aid. Things like corruption. Many times in corrupt countries, people really need aid. They need help. And so we give money to them, but it ends up going to bad things. It goes to helping the government, which is corrupt. We don't know exactly where the money goes, where it ends up. International policies can also be subtracted. When we're trying to have a good relationship with a country, we'll give them money, not necessarily thinking about if the aid's going effectively, just thinking about our status, trying to get a new trade and trying to get other things. Inequality. A lot of the time aid goes to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And I think we've learned that when the inequality is higher, then poverty is much worse. Country policies. A good example of this is the HIV/AIDS situation. Both donor countries and receiving countries have had problems with like handing out condoms, handing out clean needles, abstinence-based programs. And so something like that, when we have things that aren't being effective, should we really be giving aid to those things? Also, crippling the local economy. So when the dollar of a specific country is way lower than our dollar, and we're giving them billions and billions of dollars, the value of their money decreases, and so that can be a problem. And also accountability, especially with corruption. Like sometimes it's very hard to follow where exactly this money is going and who is accountable for it. Isn't it going to effective things? And so when I started looking at these problems that we have to subtract, I was kind of puzzled, because how can I subtract corruption from money? How can I even compare these two things when they seem like so separate? And how can you decide if it's going to be a positive outcome? If we're going to give billions of dollars and help some people, but the government is becoming more corrupt and inequality is becoming higher, then is it a good thing? And like, what is the right thing to do? And how can we even begin to fit something so complicated as this, as these problems, which we can't measure, into our equation? So this is where it starts getting tricky, because for our resources, we're adding in our money tree. So all this money is being added in, but things like the things we just discussed are being subtracted from our equation. So I didn't really know where to go from postulate number 2. So we're going to move on to postulate number 3, which is the people who are being developed are essential to our equation. Where do the people come into this equation? I think to realize how to work with the aid to solve these basic human needs, we must look at individual people's lives. We must consider a person's circumstances to understand the negative impacts of aid that might affect them, or the positive impacts. I started to ponder how I would be able to manage this all in my equation. When we begin looking at the basic human needs and resources, it is obvious that there are many different factors that can easily change a situation. Factors like type of government, sense of community, and education can change what development means to different people. When I first came up with the idea of this project, my intended goal was to make an equation for development. I wanted to put all the factors I found important in this equation to disprove GDP, the Gini coefficient, and the gross national happiness scale. The problems in each of them seemed so apparent to me, so it should be easy to just add them into the equations myself. As I continued working, my mission got harder. How am I supposed to put different people's situations into a mathematical equation? How can I decide whether subsistence will add more to people's lives than affection? And how can I decide what good aid is? How can I ask my country not to give money to people who need it because their government is corrupt? But will the money just end up worsening the situation? All these questions began to come to my mind. I finally realized that my conclusion is that there is no answer. There is no one way, one solution, one formula. We can't compare apples to oranges, Ecuadorians to South Africans, Sachelas to people in Quito, Sachelas in Los Naranjos to Sachelas in Bua. These people all have their own stories, own struggles, and own potential. Now I think the hardest part of this whole project for me is, where do I fit into this mess? I became slightly frustrated a couple days ago because I realized this project just proves that development is complicated. It seemed like a waste of my time. I learned that on day 1 of TBV. So did this PL really show how I've changed and how I want to change the world? I think it shows that I have realized how many different factors go into this subject of development. Things from historical context, to stigma, to people, to money, to resources, to the environment, to miscommunication are all important. Development is a mess, and that's why I'm struggling so much. How could I want to help people when all I do is create problems? How can I solve this problem when there is no solution? I realized it will take time, energy, patience, practice, and most of all, amazing people. I never knew how many people believed in change until I came on TVB. People want to help. We don't need to give them one solution because it won't work. Science and math are only tools for us to create change. They are necessary, but they won't create any change standing alone. What we need is people. People from all over the world to come together with their skills and talents, their hopes and dreams, and their passion for change. And that is my POL.